today was our very last day of this like beekeeping tour that we have been on. And just to kind of like give you like a recap. So this is like a beekeepers tour that we took through Bergen, Norway, through a couple of cities, all the way down to Copenhagen, Denmark. So we probably, between the ones that we drove on and the ones that we like walked on, I think we took 3, maybe 4 ferries just to do this, because there's a whole bunch of islands. Anyways, we just have done a lot of traveling by bus and by ferry. But this entire way, we have stopped at different places and like toured these beekeepers, apiaries, these beekeeping clubs, and all that kind of stuff. So today was the very last day of that, and we've arrived in Copenhagen at the Bella Center, and the conference starts tomorrow. So the conference is Apimondia, world's biggest beekeeping conference. We went down a couple years ago in Chile, and we are here in Denmark to do this one. They do it every 2 years. So when I say we, it's my wife Stephanie and I, and we decided to make a little vacation work trip out of this, and we did this beekeeping tour and really loved it. So today was the very last day. Finished up at breakfast at our hotel. Great breakfast. We stayed at this hotel right next to this, not a national park, but it's this giant park that people go and visit. Had a really great breakfast there. Like, the food has been fantastic. Like, all the fresh cheese and yogurts and different kinds of yogurts and granolas and 4 different types of eggs. And anyways, it's just that we've eaten really well on this tour, and the hotels have been really nice as well. So the first stop today is we went to a beekeeping store, which naturally I was actually really excited about going to the store. So we go to this beekeeping store, and it's a guy that he kind of used to be a commercial beekeeper, and that's like relative to commercial beekeepers in the US. So I think he said he had like 700 hives, used to make a bunch of nukes, and did that for a long time. And then honey prices went down, so he started diversifying into other parts of his business. And so he has his beekeeping store. It is a place that if you want to be a beekeeper, you can go and buy supplies. It doesn't look like they do any kind of like education or classes. It's kind of more of a feed store type of thing. And then they just have shelves of frames and boxes and polystyrene boxes as well. You can buy all the hive tools and smokers and all those things. So we got to see the store, which is really interesting. And man, I can't imagine having so many different types of frames, because at least 3 different frames that they use like up in that area for their hive. So you have 3 different size frames. I'm not talking about medium, shallow, deep. I'm talking about like these dimensions. Like Langstroth frame is this, like, you know, like 16, 17 inches of the foundation or so. And I think about 19 inches of frame. And theirs are like a lot squarer. And then one's a little bit more of a rectangle. So I couldn't imagine like stocking all these sizes. Saw the bee suits and all the hand tools and all these things that you kind of expect. There's also some tools that we don't have in the US. Like, for instance, like, we're not allowed to apply formic acid in like liquid form. But in Denmark, you are allowed. So they have all these little tools for applying formic acid to your bees. The thing that I thought was really cool is we spent a lot of time talking about his wax processing. So a lot of his business is he will actually like beekeepers will bring him frames of drawn comb that they want to melt down. And he will basically take the frame, melt the wax off of it down to just the wood and the wires. And then he will clean the frame and get it new. And then I don't know if he will put foundation back into it, or he sells the frame back to the beekeeper and the foundation separate. I didn't get that. I didn't really understand if he did that or not. But that's a big part of his business. And it's a big part of his business just because most of the beekeepers, or I guess all the beekeepers here, don't use plastic foundation. They just use pure beeswax foundation, and then the frames have wires in them. And they actually rotate that out every 1 or 2 years. So like, he showed us his steam generator and his tanks that he puts the frames in, and then he puts steam into the tank, and it melts the wax off of the frame down to just the wires. They were all like full of frames and full of slum gum and things like that. He just talked through the whole process. But like, he showed these big tanks that were full of frames, and the frames were beautiful. They had like drawn comb on them, and it was like perfect. Like, it hadn't even seen an egg. There was no cocoon in it. It was just white as can be. And they like melt it down. And they harvest from their hives like 3 times a year. And every year or every 2 years they will just like melt all this down. And that's just part of their culture, is they don't reuse wax frames like that. And like he was asked why, and he explained that they don't really show any delay in them drawing out comb when they start on pure wax foundation. He didn't mention plastic, but that wax foundation, it's a lot of wax in there. It takes about an ounce of drawn wax to do one side of a deep Langstroth frame. That's about 1 ounce of wax that they use. It's really not much. And you think about how much wax is in the pure wax foundation sheet. So there is, that's just what they do. And they don't notice any issues with just making them draw comb year after year after year. I don't think that their boxes don't get like super high. So I think they keep their total height of theirs to kind of the equivalent of like 3 deep boxes. They're not doing 2 deep boxes and then like 6 or 7 medium boxes. They're not doing a lot. So they don't have a lot of comb on the hive at one time, as they harvest 3 times a year. So I thought that was really kind of interesting. But he showed us his wax processing, and they'll melt the wax off the frames using steam, pour off the water and the wax that accumulates in the bottom of the perforated tank. And they just do the same thing we do. It just goes into a bucket, and then it settles, and the hard wax cake is on the top. And then what you're left with is slum gum that is in the tank, and he collects all that. And then he has a steam generated press. He'll squeeze the slum gum together with steam, and he said it gets like another 10% yield out of doing that process. And then he takes all of those cocoons that are left over, and he gives it to a farmer, and the farmer spreads it on his field, which is cool. And then so he's got the wax in a cake, and that's the only thing. He doesn't process that anymore. And then any of the debris that's on the bottom of it, he just uses a pressure washer, and he just sprays that off like that. He doesn't do any of the scraping stuff. And then he's left with the frame, and the frame needs to be cleaned. So he drum full of caustic soda, and I don't know exactly what that is, but he puts the frame into that, and then it cleans the frame for a couple minutes. It's boiling, and it cleans the frame off. And then he takes the frame and puts it into this commercial dishwasher, basically, and it has hot water, and just rinses all that caustic soda off the top of it, off the edges, and washes it off. And now it's like clean and stacked up and ready to go back to the beekeeper. And then he has this part of his business plan is like, he gives them credits for wax and all those things. He does not make the wax sheets. He doesn't actually make the foundation. He buys that from another place that makes it. So that was really interesting to see his place. And I just saw all of these piles of frames with drawn comb in it, and also like brood comb in it. And I just thought this would be a feast for wax moths. So I guess they're not that much of an issue here. They talk about them, but I don't, they're not storing them like that all winter long, I suppose, because they just process their wax and melt it off. And I guess in the spring, they just put new foundation on it. If you don't have drawn comb to save over the winter, I guess you don't have wax moth issues. So we walked around his property and saw like all of his stuff. He went to his honey extracting room, and he talked about processing frames of comb with wires in it that you spin out, kind of like we do, but he uses those tangential extractors. But then he also talked about extracting frames that don't have wires, and they just cut it all out, and they basically just mash it all together in what he calls a honey pulp. So it's mashed wax and honey. And then it goes into a centrifuge, it drips into it basically, and just like spins. And he's like, it's been spinning for 2 months. It's just constantly getting this stuff like mixed in to it. So he has 2 different ways of processing honey from the frame. And I guess it's like the equivalent of how we normally do it, and then also crush and extract. So we saw the honey house and all the bees flying around it. And he's obviously in the middle of extracting honey too. So it was nice of them to like let us come in and check it out. So that was great. That was the first half of our day. We got back into the bus, and then we drove for a little while longer, and then we had lunch. That was fantastic at this other place. It's like a cultural center. It's a place where Quebec associations can come and meet, and it was the local beekeeping association that hosted us. So we had a really fantastic lunch, and there was like salmon and beans and manchego, which is my favorite cheese, and blue cheese, and had brie and had feta. Again, the lunch was just fantastic. Drinks, and we had coffee later with them. So that was awesome. This was also a museum. It was like a peat moss museum. So they talked about like harvesting peat and things like that. So we didn't get into that much, but that was also there. So we left that building and walked out to their observation hive area, and it was like this little hexagonal hut, and inside it was a beehive. And that beehive had one glass wall, and then it was put right up against a glass wall on that building. And then the building had an empty top, or an open top. There's no roof on it. So they do that so somebody could walk into the building, work the bees. People can see in from the outside and watch them work the bees, stand really close to it. But they were saying that the bees, just because it's closed in on all sides except for the roof, that the bees just fly up and out, and they don't bother the people, even when they're doing observations or inspections and things like that. People can stand right outside and the bees fly right up the roof and out. So we got to see that, and that was interesting. And then we went out to their teaching apiary, and they set up some tables for us to like hang out at, and they gave a couple of presentations. They're very organized. They're a great beekeeping club, and they have all these different people that are in charge of different things. Somebody's in charge of equipment, somebody's in charge of teaching beginners, another person's in charge of teaching, advanced beekeepers, and he's been doing it for 40 years. So we didn't really open their hives. They just kind of talked about their teaching apiary, gave us mead, gave us coffee, and we just like sipped on that while they were speaking. So that was just kind of a nice to do. They told us a little bit about the politics of Denmark and beekeeping and the state association and the local associations and how all that works. They're very social, which is, that's when you kind of live kind of in the middle of nowhere. They said that it's really important for us to kind of get together. So they really emphasize they do like monthly classes, but they also do like weekly social events that also naturally turn into classes, mini classes as well. That was a fun way to just kind of like spend our last afternoon. So we are back now. Apimondia starts tomorrow. We're going to register for it in the morning, and then we'll still be doing the same thing and just kind of recording what we're doing every single day, from lectures to the honey expo, people that I run into. Like I checked in, and I've already run into several people that I know from the US, and there's going to be more people coming too. So it's nice to kind of catch up with people in another place and talk bees and talk equipment and that type of thing. So I feel like we've had a full week, and the purpose of coming to this conference or this country hasn't even started yet. So anyways, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed watching these videos and learn a little bit about what we're doing. We still got more to go. So thanks for watching. Bye.